Assalamu alaikum. Episode number 21, the boycott of the Prophet and his tribe. We have learned about the conversion of Hamza Raziallahu Anhu and Umar Raziallahu Anhu in the last episode. And in today's episode, we are going to learn about the boycott that followed these two conversions. Now, if you see the background, two things happened here. Firstly, many Muslims fled to Abyssinia that was threatening. A Muslim power was growing outside, and it was disgraceful for the Quraysh. And secondly, two of the most prominent and powerful men had left them and joined Islam. So the Quraysh are desperate, they are frustrated. In the 7th year of the Dawa movement, all the Qurayshi tribes came together and agreed that we need to kill Muhammad. And they said, how can we do it? The Banu Hashim is not going to give him over to us. So they said, we will offer whatever blood money they want. And we will even concede to them that none of us will kill him. We'll pay some other tribes to do the job. So for the final time, they go to Abu Talib and say to him, you do not have any choice now. Either hand over Muhammad to us, and we will give you the blood money, and it won't even be a Qurayshi to do the job, or we will have to cut you off from the Quraysh. We will have to start a boycott against you. Now, this is unprecedented. How can you cut off your relatives, your friends, your fellow tribes people? But the Quraysh said, none of us will allow you to get any food or water. We will boycott. We will cut off all marriages with you. There will be no business transactions with you. And such a terrible boycott. When they came to Abu Talib like this, Abu Talib becomes furious. And he says, do as you please. I will never hand over my nephew over to you. One report says that they were forced, the Banu Hashim were forced to accept the boycott, but most likely voluntarily Abu Talib decided to live elsewhere. The Banu Hashim and the Banu al-Muttalib, two cousin tribes, they imposed a type of exile on themselves and moved to a valley that the Banu Hashim owned outside of Makkah, called the Valley of Abu Talib, Shib Abu Talib. In order to solidify their stance, the Quraysh wrote a treaty amongst themselves that nobody will buy and sell to the two tribes, nobody will marry into or from them, and nobody will socialize with them. So it was a boycott of an economic, political, and social level. And they hung this treaty inside the Kaaba. And of course, nobody walks in and out of the Kaaba. So they locked the door and left it hanging inside it. They write the treaty and they hang this inside the Kaaba and lock the door of the Kaaba. It is said that Huwayd ibn Amir was the one who wrote this treaty, and the Prophet made dua against him, and his hands became paralyzed until he died. And this complete boycott forced the Banu Hashim and Banu al-Muttalib to live outside of Makkah for 2 to 3 years. Actually, there is less information about this period. For 2-3 years, the Banu Hashim and Banu al-Muttalib lived there, eking out an existence, drinking rainwater, eating from the plants and leaves. And Bilal says, we began defecating like goats defecate. Our droppings were indistinguishable from the goats. Such terrible condition. One of the main sources of food was that every few weeks, someone felt sympathy for them and would send in secret supplies of food. The most famous of them was Mu'tim ibn Adi. He was the chief of the Banu Nawfal, one of the sub-tribes of the Quraysh. This Mu'tim ibn Adi died 1 year before the Battle of Badr. He was the most sympathetic non-Muslim ever. He showed support towards the Muslims like no other, and the Prophet praised him a lot. After the Battle of Badr, the Prophet said, if Mu'tim were alive and told him to release all the captives of the war, the Prophet would have done it without any question. Motim every few weeks would go to the valley with a large camel-laden food supply, water, grain, etc., and give it to the Banu Hashim and Banu al-Muttalib. It is reported that a few other people also did this during this 2-3 year boycott. One of them was Hakim ibn Hizam. He is Khadija's nephew, who later became a famous Sahaba. Otherwise, the terrible conditions were too much to bear for the Muslims, for the Banu Hashim and Banu al-Muttalib, because there were many non-Muslims among these people, but due to tribal allegiance, the tribal loyalty, tribal love, they supported the Prophet, peace be upon him. Even when the foreigners came to trade, etc., Abu Jahl would tell them, do not sell your goods to these two tribes. I will pay double whatever they are offering. Foreigners were not barred like the Quraysh, but Abu Jahl would still prevent them from selling to the Banu Hashim and Banu al-Muttalib. Even during these 2-3 years, the Prophet continued to give dawah. During the Hajj season, he would go out of the valley and meet with the tribes and find converts to Islam. The boycott ends, alhamdulillah. A number of incidents happened that finally brought about the boycott to an end. The first was the Prophet made a dua against the Quraysh, for Allah sent upon them a drought, like the famine of Yusuf alayhi salam. And Allah accepted this dua, and the famine became so bad for the Makkans that they were forced to eat carcasses and chew on dead animal skins. And they realized this was because of the dua of the Prophet. So they sent some messengers to try to bring about some reconciliation. The second incident is that some of the people of the Quraysh with softer hearts decided that they should do something to break the pact. One of the main person was Hisham ibn Amr. Hisham called his friend Zuhair ibn Abi Umayyah. And they said, what can we do to bring about an end to this boycott? They said the first thing is to build some strength together. So they gathered all those who had the same view as them. This included Motim ibn Adi, Abu al-Bukhturi, Ibn Hisham, and a few more. They planned to speak up when all of the people are gathered. The next day, they went to the Kaaba and they all seated where they usually sit. Zuhair, who was genealogically farthest removed from the Banu Hashim and Banu al-Muttalib, stood up and said, for how long are we going to starve our own relatives to death? This is an evil thing. At this, Abu Jahl became furious and shouted, who do you think you are? We all agreed to this treaty. Hisham stood up and said, no, I didn't agree. You agreed. This is your idea. Abu Jahl said, what do you mean my idea? We had a meeting and agreed. Motim stood up and said, no, we didn't. You forced this on us. Abu Jahl said, no, I didn't force it. Anyways, Abu al-Bukhtari stood up, said the same thing, opposed Abu Jahl. So one by one, every person publicly challenged Abu Jahl, and this aroused Abu Jahl's suspicion that something was amiss. This is a plan against him. Okay, but of course they didn't confess to this. Abu Jahl didn't come to know of this plan, but he realized that the tide of public support is against him. The third thing is very interesting. One day the Prophet went to Abu Talib and said, oh my uncle, Allah has informed me that the treaty they wrote of the boycott had been eaten by the termites or ants, except for the phrase, Bismillah, in the name of Allah. And of course, this treaty was securely sealed within the Kaaba, inaccessible to anyone. The Prophet could not have known this without Allah's divine disclosure. So astonished, Abu Talib asked, your Lord has told you this? The Prophet said, yes. I will stake my whole case on this. Yes, stake it on this. So Abu Talib, okay, he believes Prophet Muhammad's truth, goes to the Haram with a group of non-Muslim fellow tribesmen, and he says, oh my people, let us forget about everything and let us bring out this treaty and see if we can reach a negotiation and deal. And this made them happy that perhaps Abu Talib would hand over the Prophet. So they took out the treaty from the Kaaba in its cloth, and Abu Talib said, "My nephew has informed me that his Lord has told him that the treaty is no longer in existence, and everything has been eaten except for the phrase in the name of Allah. So my challenge to you is, if that is the case, let us be, and we will return to Makkah. And if it is not, I will hand over my nephew to you." The Quraysh said, of course, they were happy, and they opened up the cloth. And lo and behold, there was no treaty except for the phrase Bismillah. So the Quraysh were frustrated, infuriated, and they say, this is of the Seerah magic that Muhammad has done. But they couldn't do anything because the promise had been given. And this was what nullified the treaty. And thus the Banu Hashim and Banu al-Muttalib returned to Makkah. One of the interesting things happened this time was Abu Talib wrote what is considered to be the most eloquent Arabic poetry in existence. It is called Namiyah of Abu Talib, because every single verse ends with the letter Lam, L. It is around 100 lines of poetry and is universally known as the pinnacle of poetry of that era. Ibn Kasir says, this one poem beats all of the 7 hanging poems in Makkah at the time in its style, content, and rhythm. It is absolutely powerful, but it is so advanced and beautiful that it is near impossible now to even understand. Now, what lessons we learn from the incident of the boycott? Some of the benefits we gain from the incident of the boycott is that it is amazing to see that the ties of kinship between the tribes. Many people in the Banu Hashim and Banu al-Muttalib weren't Muslims. They were Muslims, but they underwent the hardship of the boycott for the sake of tribal loyalty, for the sake of the Prophet. Every nation has some people that are mean and some people that are nice. So we take the good when people offer it and we use it against the bad. Indeed, this is what the Prophet did. We too should reach out to those who want to support freedom and are open-minded in our times. The boycott ends. So finally, the Prophet and the Sahaba and the fellow tribesmen of Banu Hashim and Banu al-Muttalib returned back to Makkah after around 2-3 years of the boycott, which means it is the 10th year of the Dawah now, and the Prophet is roughly 49 years old. After this, Allah will test the Prophet with even greater tragedies, the death of Abu Talib and Khadija radiallahu anha, and the incident of Taif. Okay, one problem after another. This was the lowest period of the Seerah of the Prophet, and this will be a precursor to the Hijrah to Medina. So in the next episode, we are going to see all these interesting and sad incidents in the life of the Prophet. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.